legacy overhead. That is what he called me. I was halfway through updating a complex compliance audit sheet when the video feed crackled to life. And there he was, Julian Foster, 30 years old if we are being generous. Probably the kind of guy who used buzzwords in bed and thought Excel macros were cutting-edge sorcery. The chief financial officer introduced him as the efficiency fixer, which is corporate code for a hatchet man with a smile. Tanned, teeth bleached, styled like he Googled the latest trends in executive grooming. "Hi, everyone," he said, giving the kind of smirk you see on guys who still do college stunts at weddings. "I am here to streamline operations and eliminate process redundancies." His eyes landed on me through the screen, like he was scanning for which antique chair to throw out first. I did not flinch, just clicked save as on the folder I kept with every licensing document, federal renewal timestamp, and internal compliance chain tied to my name, labeled it grandmother pancake recipes, and backed it up to a private drive. Edward Vance was not going out like a rookie. I had spent a decade building this framework from the ground up, making sure every protocol met the strict guidelines of the National Board. I knew every loophole, every inspection standard, and every critical signature required to keep our shipments moving. To him, I was just a line on a budget spreadsheet, an expensive obstacle to his cost-cutting goals. By lunchtime, I heard him in the break room joking with two junior analysts about phasing out old infrastructure. I am 48. Not ancient, but in Julian's world, if you do not use social media for your workflow, you are obsolete. The junior analysts laughed nervously, eager to please the new director and secure their own positions. Then came the huddle in the open floor plan. Everyone was standing around like it was an exorcism of common sense. Julian pulled up a slide deck filled with nonsense phrases like agile compliance ecosystem and decentralized accountability hubs. I watched three interns nod like they were witnessing the second coming of a Silicon Valley tech billionaire. Some of our team members, especially those with legacy responsibilities, will be reassessed to ensure alignment with our lean strategy, he said. Then, staring right at me, "We appreciate your historical contributions, Edward." Historical, like I was a damn sarcophagus in the basement of human resources. I did not say a word, just smiled. The kind of smile you give when someone walks into a bear trap you have been camouflaging for 10 years. They did not realize that compliance was a legal shield, not a set of guidelines that could be easily modified to suit their quarterly budget goals. And quick pause before we keep going. If you are listening and not subscribed, help a soul out. Trying to hit 10,000 subscribers so I can finally afford an office chair without a missing wheel. Seriously, 95% of you listen without clicking the button. Just one tap, and you will make this guy real proud. All right, back to the meltdown. That night, I stayed late, not because I was forced to work. I wanted to watch the system breathe like a parent, watching their kids sleep before social services show up. I double-checked my credentials across 3 federal platforms. My active certification, renewal control, licensing PIN, and audit clearance were still tied to my name. I made sure the timestamps matched. Then I printed my contract clause, the one nobody ever reads. Section 7C. In the event of involuntary termination, all company-paid licensing responsibilities and regulatory certification shall be considered void, and all credentials will be formally rescinded within 48 hours of contract nullification. Nobody noticed when I left the building. But I noticed the way Julian's eyes lingered on me that morning like a predator staring at a target, not realizing the target has access to defense systems. You ever see a man mistake a fuse for a shoelace? You will. I spent an hour reviewing the database architecture, ensuring that my revocation script was fully operational. The system was designed to protect the integrity of the compliance logs, and if my credentials were deactivated, the entire dashboard would lock down to prevent unauthorized modifications. It was a standard security measure, but under Julian's management, it was a time bomb. I logged off my station, took my personal belongings, and drove home under the cover of a cool evening. By the next Tuesday, Julian had taped a poster above the copier that said, "Compliance does not equal complacency." The font was terrible. Then came the real fun. Everyone, yes, everyone, was told they had to re-interview for their evolved role. It was spun like a bonding exercise, like we should be grateful for a chance to pitch ourselves for the same job titles printed on our health insurance cards. One by one, folks shuffled into conference rooms like kids headed to the principal's office. The newer hires came out smiling, parroting things like Julian really sees me, and he is bringing fresh air. I wanted to tell them that kind of air comes from a busted sewer. The corporate culture was rotting from the top down, and everyone was too afraid for their paychecks to point out that the emperor was wearing nothing but a cheap polyester blazer. I watched the junior staff prepare their presentations, filling their slides with buzzwords they had learned from online business seminars, completely oblivious to the practical realities of our compliance operations. They did not understand that a single missing signature on a shipping manifest could halt $1 million delivery at the state line. They thought compliance was just paperwork, a minor administrative hurdle that could be easily automated or delegated to an intern. When it was my turn to sit in the small interrogation room, I did not bring a resume. I brought silence. Julian barely looked up from his thin laptop, typing away as if my presence were merely a brief distraction from his critical spreadsheet adjustments. "Edward, you have been here a while," he said, his voice flat. "10 years," I replied, cool as a cucumber in a winter blizzard. "Right. Institutional knowledge. We value that." His fingers tapped the keys, probably typing redundant relic into the corporate messaging application. He pulled up a half-baked organizational chart on the monitor and pointed at a small box labeled Regulatory Stewardship. Under it, my name was crossed out in red. Next to it, the text read open to be reassigned. Then he clicked a tab labeled Quarter 3 Renewal Delegation. My eyes clocked the file name, which read Quarter 3 License Transition Plan Version 1. In the comments section, it read, "Can this be transferred downstream?" Downstream in Julian speak meant dumped onto someone too green to spell the name of the regulatory agencies. I smiled and did not flinch, but inside my mind, a loud warning siren started wailing. I knew that the junior staff had no understanding of the complex filing deadlines and the biometric signature requirements of the Federal Registry. They were playing a game they did not understand, and they were about to make a very expensive mistake. When I got back to my desk, I opened the database I had built from scratch in 2016. The one that tracked every single compliance certificate, its expiration date, which governing body it reported to, and who held the official signature authority. There were 43 items on the list, 43 licenses, 43 pieces of regulatory red tape woven together into one tight corporate noose, and every single one of them was tied directly to my name. I exported a fresh copy of the entire log, encrypted the file, zipped it, renamed it Employee Birthday Cake List, and emailed it to my private account. Then I cleared the Sent Items folder. Call me paranoid, but I have seen what happens when children play with matches and call it innovation. They burn down the house and wonder why the roof is gone. The database was the result of years of meticulous work, documenting the exact requirements for each of our production lines. Without it, the company would have to manually audit every single process, a task that would take months and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees. I knew that without this digital ledger, the entire operation would be blind to their compliance deadlines. Later that afternoon, Julian formally reassigned my inspection preparation to a marketing intern who genuinely thought the Food and Drug Administration stood for food design aesthetic. No lie. She asked me if that meant redesigning the lunchroom posters to look more organic. Meanwhile, I was officially tasked with reorganizing the janitorial supply shelf in the corridor. Julian said it would keep me in the loop at a foundational level, foundational like basement mold. I asked politely if I still had administrative access to our licensing dashboard. Julian blinked like I had just spoken ancient Aramaic. "Oh, I think we routed that administrative access to Sophie Jenkins last week," he said, adjusting his sleeves. "You do not really need it anymore, right?" Sophie had just learned how to convert a document to a portable document format file. I did not argue. I just nodded, walked down the hall to an old terminal, logged in, and revoked her access from the shadow admin panel I had kept entirely secret. If I was getting kicked off the ship, I was not leaving the map behind for the crew. I made sure that only my master key could access the root registry. Sophie would see an interface, but she would have no power to submit official filings to the federal database. She was holding a plastic steering wheel while the car was headed for a cliff. I also modified the security parameters so that any attempts to reset the master administrative credentials would require a physical hardware token that I kept on my keychain. I had purchased that token with my own personal funds years ago, so it was legally my property, not the company's. They had never bothered to audit our hardware inventory, so they had no idea that the physical key to their digital kingdom was leaving the building in my front pocket. I walked past Julian's glass-walled office later that day. He was laughing loudly on a speaker call, making a gesture about scrubbing out the old wood. He did not notice me watching him, but I noticed something. The fuse was much shorter now, and the entire room smelled like smoke. I went back to my desk and quietly packed my remaining notebooks. The junior staff members looked away when I walked by, too cautious to offer a handshake or a word of farewell, fearing they would be marked as legacy sympathizers. I did not mind. I had spent decades in this industry, and I knew that when the storm arrived, those who had turned their backs would be the first to drown in the flood. I cleared my browser history, turned off the monitor, and left the building for the night, leaving the silence to settle over the workspace. The silence was a physical presence in the office, a warning of the impending collapse that none of the new managers were smart enough to anticipate. They were too busy celebrating their imaginary efficiency gains to notice that the legal foundation of the business was slowly dissolving beneath their feet. The first time I heard them laughing, I let it slide. It was 3 of the junior analysts, fresh from college, still wet behind the ears and smug with borrowed confidence, hovering over a printout of my old compliance flowchart, like it was a primitive cave painting. "This thing uses color codes like it is a children's coloring box," one of them snorted. Another added, "He even timestamps everything manually. Does he not know automation exists?" They were clustered near the break room like a pack of overconfident poodles, sipping cold brew and dropping buzzwords like agile iteration and machine learning integration, as if those phrases had ever stopped a federal audit from shutting down a production line. I walked past them with my head held high, but my spine burned with a cold determination. They did not understand that those manual timestamps were a legal requirement of the State Safety Board, designed to prevent backdating and ensure accountability. They thought they could automate away the law, but the law does not care about agile iterations or slide decks. By Wednesday, I had been locked out of 3 internal dashboards, 2 of which I had designed myself. No warning, no access request. Just a red error 403 screen and a pop-up that said, "Contact your system administrator." The irony was thick. I was the system administrator, or at least, I had been until Julian decided that my credentials were a process redundancy. I emailed my concerns to Human Resources, but received no reply. I tried calling, but the voicemail greeting was colder than January in a northern city. I finally got a real person on the line after 4 attempts, and they told me flatly, "Sorry, Edward. All Human Resources requests must now go through your departmental manager." That was Julian. It was like they were announcing his total authority with more hair gel and less regulatory oversight. I did not reply. I just hung up and stared at my monitor, empty but glowing. I had been cut off from every meaningful interface in less than a week. No explanations, just streamlining. It was an insidious process, designed to make me feel isolated and powerless, to force me to resign so they would not have to pay severance. But they did not realize that by cutting me off, they were also severing their own connection to the Federal Registry. I spent the rest of the day clearing out my personal items from my desk, packing them into a small cardboard box. I made sure to leave behind everything that belonged to Crawford Enterprises, including the company-issued pens and notebooks, but I took my personal coffee mug and the framed photograph of my father. I did not want to leave a single trace of my presence in that building. I wanted my absence to be absolute, a clean break that they would feel in every department. So, I scheduled a 10-minute slot at a small notary office, a quiet little place above a nail salon on Monroe Avenue. No fanfare, just me, a stiff wooden chair, and a form titled Voluntary Relinquishment of Licensing Authority. I did not sign it yet, just notarized the option, keeping it tucked into my coat pocket like a safety pin in case things turned into a freefall. Afterward, I walked back to the office with a warm coffee and the deadest smile you have ever seen. Julian passed me in the hallway and said, "Hope you are feeling more aligned this week, Edward." I nodded and replied that I was just tying up loose ends. He smiled his corporate snake smile. What he did not know was that every loose end I tied came with a fuse, and I had the match ready. I spent the afternoon organizing my personal files, making sure that my exit would be clean and legally unimpeachable. I did not want them to have any ground to stand on when the collapse occurred. It happened on a Monday, because of course it did. The kind of Monday where the air in the office feels like microwaved plastic, and everyone pretends they like their jobs just enough to survive another week. We were all gathered for Julian's new weekly momentum meeting. He stood at the front of the open-floor bullpen in his tight blue blazer and did that palms-out gesture like he was calming down a herd of sheep. "Let us start with some candor," he said, pacing like he was about to sell us timeshares in a bad resort. "While tradition has value, stagnation is a threat." He stopped right behind my chair. "And unfortunately, certain legacy roles are no longer aligned with our forward momentum. Effective immediately, Edward Vance's position has been phased out." No warning, no meeting, just a sentence in the air. I stood up, signed the termination page without a word, and walked out. When I signed that form, Section 7C of my contract activated. At 7:13 in the evening, my phone pinged. My authority over licenses was formally relinquished. The digital noose was now tightening around Julian's forward momentum, and I slept like a baby. The notification email from the registry board confirmed that the licenses were now marked as orphaned, and the countdown to automatic suspension had begun. Julian was celebrating his victory, completely unaware that he had just cut the main power line to the entire corporate compliance system. Wednesday morning started with a whimper and a very expensive box of nothing. At 9:04 in the morning, procurement tried to confirm the shipment of medical-grade filtration components for one of our biotech clients. Stuff you do not even breathe near without 3 signatures and a biohazard stamp. The vendor's reply was clear. "Cannot fulfill shipment, receiving entity listed as inactive. License CN 8835-44 expired. Contact listed certifying officer." That was me. The client was furious. They had a critical product launch scheduled for the following week, and this delay threatened to stall their entire production. Called our office, shouting about breach of contract and demanding immediate resolution. 10 minutes later, the system started logging anomalies. Logins failed, database calls choked, and a scheduled data sync to the federal audit portal returned a rejection code stating invalid license holder. Within the hour, our internal license dashboard started lighting up like a Christmas tree in hell with red alerts and inactive flags. Julian strolled into the operations pod with his coffee and said confidently, "We will just update the contact info." Rachel Myers, a compliance analyst, tried to explain. "Sir, contact updates require certification reauthorization." Edward was the certifying officer legally. Julian blinked, "So do it anyway." Rachel replied that I was the only credentialed officer with reauthorization authority across all active verticals, and the re-registration period would take weeks. There was a fatal silence in the room. They had no backup plan, no alternate credentials, and no understanding of how to navigate the complex Federal Registry Board website. They had spent so much time focusing on their agile strategies and decentralized accountability hubs that they had completely forgotten to maintain the basic operational compliance that allowed the company to function in the first place. Julian sat in his office, his face pale, as he stared at the red warning banners blinking on his screen, realizing that his efficiency program had just halted the entire production line. Meanwhile, I was at home in my comfortable flannel sweatpants, eating knockoff toasted oat cereal from a giant economy bag, and reading the entire unfolding crisis from a long email chain. A former colleague from the department, who had always despised Julian's arrogance, had quietly blind copied my personal email account into the thread. It was like watching a live broadcast of a shipwreck. Someone even included a screenshot of Julian's frantic Slack message to the legal channel, asking if anyone knew how to override a license expiry tag on the dashboard thingy. Yes, he called it a thingy. That dashboard had been my primary project and my baby for 5 years, and I had designed it to lock down tighter than a vault if certain critical revocation events were fired. It was not just a bureaucratic tracking tool, it was an active security shield. If anyone without the proper credentials attempted to access the certification keys, the system automatically blacklisted their IP address and reported the unauthorized intrusion directly to the internal audit registry logs. Julian discovered this the hard way that very afternoon when he attempted to brute force his way into the database. His corporate IP was instantly blocked, shutting him out of the entire network. By lunchtime, Human Resources was getting panicked messages from upper management asking how to get me back. But the only person who could have answered was too busy figuring out if he wanted hot chicken soup or buffalo wings for lunch. I went with both, ordering a feast from the local diner and enjoying every bite. The office was in utter chaos, with managers running between rooms, trying to find physical paper records to prove our compliance. But they quickly discovered that all recent audits were stored digitally within my secure environment. The corporate attorney warned Julian that attempting to bypass the security measures or using my old login details could constitute a federal offense, which only added to the panic. They were completely paralyzed, unable to move forward or backward. Friday morning came with silent sirens. A randomized federal site inspection was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. The inspectors walked in with clipboards and the moral authority of tax auditors. By 9:22, the front desk called compliance, saying 3 inspectors were asking for the license holder. Julian, now visibly sweating through his blazer, sprinted to the operations wing and barked at legal to get my credentials reinstated. A junior associate searched for guidelines, but the regulatory board's help desk told them that Edward Vance had voluntarily relinquished his license authority, and his identity had been removed from the registry. Reinstatement required full recertification, which would take 4 to 6 weeks. Julian stared at the speakerphone in shock. They flipped through my termination file, but found nothing. They had pulled out the linchpin of their operations like a wisdom tooth hooked into the spine. Across town, Nancy Brooks from documentation called my phone, asking if I had done this. I took a sip of my coffee, looked out the window, and replied calmly, "No, you did. I did not hang up hard. This was not revenge. It was simple math. 1 + 1 equals you fired the wrong person." The company legally could not allow the inspectors into the secured wings without a licensed officer, meaning the audit failed, and every client relying on certified compliance was in technical breach of contract in approximately 4 hours. I went to get my nails cleaned, enjoying the quiet afternoon. The inspectors left the building after issuing a formal notice of non-compliance, which carried an immediate suspension of all production activities. The factory floor went dead silent as the assembly lines were halted one by one, leaving the managers to stare at the silent machines in absolute despair. Monday morning, at 8:37 in the morning, the office building smelled of panic. That was when he walked in, Nicholas Crawford, the chief executive officer. His skin was tanned from a luxury resort vacation, and he wore a silk shirt that screamed wealth. He strolled through the glass atrium, throwing finger guns at the reception staff, completely oblivious to the plane crash he was walking into. By the time he reached his office, he had 3 urgent emails and a voicemail from legal that ended with the words "non-compliance disaster." At 9:02 in the morning, he burst into the operations room to find operations frozen, vendor shipments halted, and inspections failed. He turned to the room of red-eyed managers. "Who is handling this?" Everyone turned to Julian. Nicholas pulled up my termination paperwork on the monitor, read the clauses, and said quietly, "You fired the license holder." Matt stammered about redundancies, but Nicholas thundered, "His name is on every regulatory document, and you let a kid who writes in buzzwords fire him." Nicholas grabbed his phone, but Human Resources admitted I was unresponsive. He looked at Julian and said, "We will pay whatever it takes to get him back." Nicholas knew that every day the factory remained shut down, the company lost $50,000 in direct revenue, not to mention the potential legal damages from our clients. He was a businessman who understood the cold reality of numbers, and he could see that Julian's efficiency initiative was costing the company millions of dollars in real time. The executive suite was in complete disarray, with directors arguing over who was responsible for the oversight, while Nicholas sat at the head of the table, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. He knew that the company's survival was now in the hands of the man they had escorted from the building just days ago. He ordered an immediate audit of all personnel files, hoping to find some loophole, but the legal reality was clear and unyielding. The board members were white-knuckled, whispering about client lawsuits, regulatory fines, and the potential collapse of their stock price. Crawford Enterprises was facing a complete operational freeze, and every hour that passed cost them tens of thousands of dollars in penalties. Nicholas realized that a single corporate manager's arrogance had destroyed a decade of regulatory goodwill in a matter of minutes. By noon, my inbox had 6 high-priority messages, and a voicemail from Nicholas's assistant, Jason Cole, who sounded like he had not slept in days. The offer was a consulting role, 6 months minimum, at a reduced salary but with generous performance bonuses and a strict gag order. No social media, no comments to regulators. It was desperation dressed in human resources formatting. I reread it twice, noticed the complete lack of an apology, and wrote back, "Nicholas, I appreciate the offer. Truly. Unfortunately, I do not return to burning buildings, especially the ones where I was thrown into the fire. Please find attached a copy of my signed termination clause and confirmation of my license revocation. Wishing you compliance and clarity. Edward Vance." I clicked send and felt a deep sense of peace. Nicholas read the email in silence and realized they had excommunicated the only person who understood the system. The offer was a joke, an attempt to claw back control while still protecting their own pride. They did not want to admit they had made a mistake, so they tried to bribe me back under the guise of a consulting contract. I was not interested in saving their ship while they were still holding the same matches. I closed my laptop and enjoyed the rest of my afternoon, knowing that my legal position was completely secure. 3 weeks later, the professional networking site imploded with notifications. I posted my new position as Director of Compliance at Stratex Biocore, sharing a photo of my clean, modern office. The post was simple, but below it were 2 lines of pure fire. Stratex Biocore secures Omega Med and Viarch contracts, citing continuous compliance confidence as deciding factor. Those were the crown jewels, the 2 biggest clients my old company had, who had walked away after their certification backlog hit an indefinite delay. Stratex did not need a hard sell. They knew my reputation and my track record. Meanwhile, back at Crawford Enterprises, the dashboard remained red. Fines rolled in daily. Clients panicked, and Julian was demoted to project associate level 2 with a 19-inch monitor. He was eventually let go via a 3-minute video call. I have a corner office now with glass walls and a quiet chair. Every morning, I check the industry feeds and watch the storms I have already outflown. Pinned to my monitor is a yellow sticky note that reads, "In case they ever forget I was the license." Thanks for joining the story, Office Survivors. Subscribe for more drama, and let us make your former coworkers sweat. The victory was complete, not because I had ruined them, but because I had built something better. I had proven that precision and experience are worth more than any spreadsheet metric, and I had done it on my own terms. The new office was quiet, the team was professional, and for the first time in years, I felt that my work was truly valued. I looked forward to the future, knowing that my skills were respected and my professional legacy was secure in the industry. The industry knew who built the foundation, and no corporate reorg could ever change that fact. I took a slow sip of my coffee, smiled at the city view, and went back to work.